I want to spend as much time as we can on the Great Reset, which is really a thing. The World Economic Forum, really a thing. By the way, I was like a little bit skeptical of this stuff until I read your stuff on this. It's really mind blowing. I had kind of thought it was conspiracy theorist kooks who were talking about Davos and the Great Reset, and so I went to my favorite conspiracy theorist kook, James Corbett, and he convinced me that it's all true. Let's do that. And it would be great if you could also connect it to history, these progressives. There's something, what's connecting, let's do that. What's connecting progressives in 1905, 1910 with the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset and the party of Davos, as Steve Bannon likes to call it?
As I know you can appreciate, and I hope your audience will be able to appreciate, it's incredibly difficult to do justice to this information in just a short conversation like this. So I will refer people firstly, question mark. I don't know what order in which to recommend people, but I would suggest that they, at the very least, look up my Big Oil documentary, corbettreport.com/Big Oil, all one word. And that's how Big Oil conquered the world and why Big Oil conquered the world. And especially in why Big Oil conquered the world, I think the narrative arc that I was painting there was from that eugenics philosophy in late 19th century England and how that metamorphosed in America and in Nazi Germany into the environmental movement and the population control movement, and is continuing to metastasize into the technocratic vision of the future. That's kind of the big arc of where we're going and how we got there. But it does connect through specific people and institutions. And in this case, talking about Big Oil, of course, we're talking about things like the Rockefeller family. Of course, they are the Big Oil family, right? Well, not just, of course, about oil. In fact, they've all divested. The Rockefeller fund has divested from all oil. I mean, great. Yay. We beat Big Oil, guys. Yay. Maybe that's not the end of the story. So what are they investing in these days? And where have those investments gone? So that is an important part of the story. And part of that is, as I alluded to earlier, John D. Rockefeller III setting up the Population Council from the ashes of the American, well, not even the ashes, I suppose it still continued on under different guises, but really the core of the American Eugenics Society just transferred over to the Population Council and continued on their work. And as I say, the World Wildlife Federation and other things that you would not expect to have such weirdly dark roots actually do when you start to look at the actual people who signed them and the documents that they signed, etc. And that brings us to things like the Club of Rome, which in the 19th, it's a talking shop, essentially, and a members forum for people who are concerned about things like the natural environment. And so in the 1970s, they came up with the Limits to Growth, which is a document that is profoundly Malthusian in nature. And Malthus is another, I think, an important person, not because of the important things that he wrote, but because of the lasting influence of the things that he wrote on things like the eugenics movement, that essentially the earth is a small fixed pie. And there are more and more greedy, grubby human beings trying to get a piece of that pie. So we're going to have to decide who gets a piece of this pie and who will be eliminated from the gene pool. I think that's a core part of what is tied in with eugenics and progressivism ultimately, which is based on a completely false assumption. If people want more on that, they should read about Julian Simon and the ultimate resource, because the ultimate resource on the planet is not iron or tungsten or copper or nickel. It is the human brain.
It's us. Can I stop you there just for a second? The idea is that the Earth's resources are finite, which we know is false. And we can get into that in a second. And that the problem, though, is so you have finite resources and greed. Greed combined with finite resources causes scarcity, poverty, right? That makes sense. Like the internal logic makes sense.
Yes. It's a profoundly simple and understandable idea. And it seems to make such intuitive sense that how could it be wrong? So it must be right, even though it has been wrong for the last 2 centuries since Malthus was writing. So people who don't know, please go back and read Malthus and his population problem, essentially, which was that population or food supply is increasing arithmetically, but population is increasing exponentially. Put 2 and 2 together, guys. Within 20 years, England's going to be essentially a barren hellhole of people eating each other's brains because there's no food, etc. Well, that didn't exactly happen. Now, did it? It didn't didn't happen in Malthus's lifetime or the lifetime of his descendants or the descendants. In fact, it's never happened. This impending crisis is predicted over and over and over and over again for centuries now, and never quite comes, but it's always just around the corner. The latest iteration of that, speaking of rock star super scientists, of course, is Paul Ehrlich, who people will know, the population bomb, all of that. Please see a report that I did. It's at corbettreport.com/Ehrlich, and it's about Paul Ehrlich, a pseudoscience charlatan who has been wrong about everything, profoundly, ridiculously, laughably wrong with his predictions over and over. Oh, by the year 2000, England's going to be completely out of food, and everything's going to be hell in a handbasket, etc. Completely wrong. But that mentality is so ingrained in the population that I think most people don't even realize that they ultimately fully subscribe to it. There are so many people who are absolutely convinced that we are facing this profound overpopulation problem, even as, oh, by the way, it turns out that human fertility is decreasing at an alarming rate. And in fact, you can go and read even in the pages of The Guardian just this past month, talking about the end of human fertility by the 2045, according to some scientists, etc. I mean, just profound changes that are happening because of these endocrine disrupting chemicals, plastics that are polluting our environment right now. Real profound environmental problems, but carbon dioxide is the only thing you're allowed to talk about. But anyway, stepping around that minefield for the moment, that brings us to the limits to growth in 1970s, which, as its title might imply, was this document about how, oh, there are limits to growth because look, we have only such a finite amount of resources and we're running out, and we we're going to have to find a way to contain the human population, etc. Now, what does that have to do with the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset? Well, as it turns out, at the World Economic Forum, I believe it's second ever. I'll have to double check on that. But one of its very, very early meetings was attended and co-chaired, and the central keynote speech was delivered by the person who was heading the Club of Rome at that time, talking essentially about the limits to growth, etc. This was organized by this shadowy Klaus Schwab, who was this guy with a lot of degrees who you can find very little about his actual family history and where did he come from and who is he and why did he come to this position of prominence. But he started this organization in the 1970s that became known as the World Economic Forum, and which now seems to be this organization through which all of these world leaders and economists and business leaders, of course, gather in Davos every year. I'm sure everyone's heard about the gathering in Davos, but now they're launching something called the Great Reset, and Prince Charles and John Kerry and all these other people are telling us that we've hit the Great Reset button and there's no going back and humanity is shifting forever. And then you start reading what Klaus Schwab is writing, of course, his ghostwriter, is writing about transhumanism, and we're all going to be transformed and taking brain chips, and like actually read his actual writings on this. Don't take conspiracy theorist James Corbett for word for this. No, what he says is 10 times crazier. That we are facing the ultimate convergence of our biological and technological and digital identities, and we're going to essentially be uploading our consciousness to the cloud in the future. Just insanity. But this is what is being openly talked about now in the context of this Great Reset. We're being told we're changing the social contract, which I don't remember ever signing. But anyway, I'm sure it's out there somewhere. Can I find a copy of that somewhere so that I can? Who's talking about the changes and alterations to this document that doesn't exist? Oh, that's right, the World Economic Forum, which has appointed itself leaders, that is being stewarded by people like the Club of Rome, talking about the limits to growth and the need to curtail the human population. But don't worry your head about that. They love you, and that's why they're giving you the experimental gene therapy.